Well, it's wonderful to be here with all of you at United Plant Savers. I first met Kelsey and Susan 3 or 4 years ago at a conference and have been talking about coming and visiting, and so glad to be able to bring this into my Earth Provides Us with Everything We Need tour, and it was a joy to be out on the land learning about more of the plants that we share this home with. So my name is Robin Greenfield, for those of you who don't know, and right now I'm on a year-long project of foraging 100% of my food and medicine, down to the salt, the oil, the spices, the calories, the fat, the protein, the water, and so I'm deeply immersing with the plants. I think today's day 17 of the year, so I still have a long way to go. And before I dive into sharing about all of these plants, mushrooms, also animals that I have foraged and gathered, and this experience, I want to go back a little bit further to what led me to this point, if you can all hold some of your anticipation for learning about what's in all these jars. So in 2011, I was 25 years old. I was living a fairly typical US American lifestyle. I was very focused on material possessions and financial wealth. I had set the goal of becoming a millionaire by the time I turned 30, and I was on track to accomplish that goal. I was running a marketing company that had a bunch of people out selling ads to get people to buy stuff they didn't need. And I was traveling the world, which had always been an ambition of mine. I had friends, I had romance, I had the material possessions I was seeking, and all of this was accumulating a great deal of health and happiness, actually. I was not doing that and feeling this depression or sadness. I was happy and I was healthy, and I could have kept doing that for the rest of my life, and life would have been excellent. And then something happened, and I realized that I wanted to totally transform my life. Some people would expect it would take some sort of near-death experience, maybe death of a family member, or maybe some sort of moment of enlightenment or something like that. But actually for me, all that happened was I started to watch some documentaries, and I started to read some books, read some articles online, make some new friends, and I learned that the way that I was living was causing such incredible destruction to this earth that we live upon. And such that I was wrapped into this intricate web of exploitation and oppression and extraction through almost all of my daily actions. So the food I was eating, the car I was driving, the stuff I was buying, the trash I was creating, the money I was spending, the money I was investing, the money that was sitting in my bank account, even the water that I was drinking in San Diego, where I was at the time, I realized was part of systems of extraction and destruction. So what I realized was that I had woven myself into a web of consumerism. And at that time, I could have felt total helplessness and hopelessness, doom and gloom. I mean, I realized that the corporations were lying to me. Governments were, hiding the truth behind closed doors of our actions. Society was not telling me the truth of our lives. And so I could have felt, and I did feel, some of that hopeless and helplessness, overwhelm, some anger, depression, disheartenment. I'm pretty certain everyone in this room has felt some, and some of us feel every single day right now, especially in the times that we live in. And while I did feel some of that, I also felt even more so inspiration, empowerment, excitement, because these books I was reading, these documentaries I was watching, these organizations I was learning about, they weren't just telling me the problems that existed, they were also sharing solutions for a new way forward. I was learning that we can live, the word for me at that time in 2011 was sustainably, to live sustainably. And so I became, maybe not overnight, but very quickly, deeply passionate about transforming my life. So what I decided to do was that I was going to one step at a time take my life back. And at the core of all of this was learning about our food system, the global industrial food system in which I was getting my food from, and which the majority of human beings on this earth do get their food from. So I became the most passionate about my food. I was passionate about every way in which I could live in harmony with the earth, but my food was one of the really big ones, and a way that I learned that I could take my power back. Documentaries like Food Inc. and books like The Omnivore's Dilemma by Michael Pollan were some of the ones that really shook me at my core. And I started to learn about permaculture. I started to make friends with herbalists. I started to learn about the reality of the pharmaceutical industry. And so I started with small changes to take my life back. Instead of going to Walmart, where almost all of my food came from, I started to buy my food at a local grocery store. I also went to Trader Joe's. Then I learned that Trader Joe's is a whole lot of greenwashing. There's nothing sustainable about it, just good advertising. And so I started to go to the local food co-op. I would buy my food in the bulk section so I wasn't creating all of this garbage. I started to buy my herbs there to make herbal tea. I started to go to the local farmers market and connect with the farmers and the growers. I started to grow a little bit of food in my backyard. I found an old bookshelf and laid that down and filled that up with soil and started to grow some tomatoes, and I think there was some kale in there and a couple different herbs. I started to harvest rainwater to water that garden. I started to harvest gray water, so the water from my sink, I would, instead of sending that down the drain to go to waste, I could use that to water my garden to grow food. I remember experimenting with some aquaculture, so raising tilapia, and I was raising black soldier fly larvae to try to feed the tilapia. That experiment never produced very much, except a lot of critical thinking and a lot of motivation and inspiration. And then I also learned about foraging. I learned that food and medicine is actually growing all around us. I was in San Diego at the time, so I learned about nasturtium and lamb's quarters and guavas and citrus. These were some of the foods that I was starting to forage just a little bit of here and there. And so what I was doing was one step at a time, unraveling this web of consumerism, because each of these new changes that I was making were breaking me free from the global industrial food system, from corrupt corporations, and instead plugging me into my local community. That was a big part of what was happening. I was starting to walk to places and ride a bike instead of getting in my car as much, and starting to have a deeper connection with earth. I stopped buying cheap booze and instead putting that money into really high quality foods and medicines. And so after about 1.5 years of making changes, I had made over 100 changes in my life. My goal was one positive change a week for 2 years. And so that's the trajectory that I set out on, to sort of radically transform my life. Well, not sort of. Radically transform my life, but sort of quickly, but also sort of, for some people that would be very rapid, impossible if you have, maybe a full-time job and multiple kids and a mortgage and such, but I made it my full-time job to be transforming my life. So it was rapid, but at the same time it was step by step. And so what happened is I unraveled that web of consumerism and I created a new web, a web of interconnection, a web of relationships, a web of skills that was much more localized and was more and more based around plants. which was very different from my upbringing, which was the only plants I really knew were the ones that were going to poison you, stick things to you, make you itch. And now I was learning, wow, the abundance that exists all around us, and really getting passionate about that. At that time, though, most of my food was still something I was buying. I grew a little bit of food and I foraged some of my food, but I hadn't dived in too deep. In 2016, so 5 years later, I took my permaculture design course. That was a big learning point for me. In 2014, I biked across the country and we were planting trees and helping to start gardens. I created the Free Seed Project to provide seeds to people who wouldn't otherwise have access to food. But I wasn't usually around to experience the whole process of seed to food on my plate, just a little bit. So it was in 2019 that I decided I was going to deeply immerse in my food and really break free from the global industrial food system. One thing I didn't mention is I had been dumpster diving a lot for the last years. I learned that we waste about $165 billion worth of food in this country, in what we call the United States, per year, while 1 in 7 U.S. Americans are food insecure. And so for years I lived off of that waste, and that was great. I was diverting food from the landfill, and I wasn't supporting that industry. But now I wanted to see, could I break free from it completely and actually grow and forage all of my food and medicine from the land? So that's what I set out to do in 2019, and I was in Orlando, Florida at the time, primarily because I wanted to be somewhere warm. I'm from northern Wisconsin, that's where I'm born and raised, and I personally just really like to be warm. So that's where I set out on that endeavor. And also, it's nice to be able to grow some food year-round. Plus there's coconuts and mangoes, and some wonderful things like that. Yes, the mangoes. So I started out though, when I started that, I went online and I typed in, how much water does a carrot seed need? And how much sunshine does kale need? I really did not know what I was doing. I showed up there in Orlando with just a backpack of everything I owned, a few $1,000s, and started to make connections in the community. And what I did is I turned people's front yards into gardens. So I turned 6 yards into gardens, and that's where probably 50 to 75% of my food would come from. And then I shared that food with the people who owned that land, and they were all in front yards where others could access that food as well. And so I started to take classes. I would go to permaculture classes. I would go to local nurseries and go to different gardening classes, go to the community gardens. I went on my first plant walks with Andy Firk and with a guy named Greenfield as well, which are foraging teachers down in Florida. So I gave myself 6 months to go from 0% to 100% of my food coming from what I grew and foraged. And I wasn't ready after 6 months. And partly because we were planting so many gardens for other people. We were really working hard on helping others to grow food as well. So it ended up being 10 months. So after 10 months, it was November 11th, 2019, my first breakfast of that year was my first meal ever that was 100% homegrown and foraged. So I dived in pretty deep that day. And for the next year, that's exactly what I did. Every breakfast, lunch, and dinner came from the gardens that I had started or from foraging. Every snack in between, no stopping at a grocery store or a restaurant, no dumpster diving, although some people call that urban foraging. That's a different type of foraging. And even if I wanted to say, I was looking into maybe going wild boar hunting. I would have, if I was going to bait them like most people do, I would have had to have used my own sweet potatoes or food that I foraged. So all the food, I was very deeply looking into that, and seeing, can I meet all of my needs from the land? Now some people would say, why would you do that when you could eat from others' gardens? Well, one reason is because I had a lot of friends with food forests, and if I ate from their food forests, I wouldn't have to learn how to do this. I wouldn't have to learn all of these skills. So at the core of my message is community. It's growing food together. But this was a way for me to deeply immerse, to learn all the skills. And also, my activism is designed to create a story that can bring people in. People who are often totally disinterested in their food, in environmental and social issues. So when people hear he's growing and foraging all of his food, it's a way to bring people in. And it's also a way to bring media in. So that's what I've been doing for the last 10 years is, as I was transforming my life, also immersing in this activism, these activism campaigns where I was living my message in a very, very outward way to bring people into this story that brings people into questioning our societal ways, questioning our personal ways, questioning our own minds and our own actions. And the main question is, am I living the life that I truly want to? Another way of saying that is, are my actions in alignment with my beliefs? And if the answer is yes, I'm living the exact life that I want, and yes, my actions are in alignment with my beliefs, then great, no further, nothing needed. But if the answer when we ask that question is we feel a little bit of like a pit in our stomach or a little bit of something here in our chest, then it's okay, what can we do differently? And then it's about exploring the solutions. So that year, I came out of that year in one of the healthiest states of my adult life. I managed to complete the year. I foraged 200 different species of foods and medicines from the land and grew over 100 different species in my gardens. And I came away from that really seeing that the earth can provide us with everything that we need, that we can exist outside of the global industrial food system. In 2022, I decided that I was going to forage all of my food for 1 month. So this time, no gardens. Nature would be my garden, my pantry, and my pharmacy. That was the fall of 2022, and I started in Wisconsin, and I was actually on a 1-month tour from Wisconsin to Washington, D.C. with cities in between. So for that, now I had to learn how to meet all of my needs, not from the garden. So that meant no more could I rely on rosemary and oregano and thyme and basil for the culinary herbs. Now I had to see if I could make tasty meals, nourishing meals, satiating meals just on what is growing wildly and abundantly from earth. And I struggled, definitely. One of my main struggle was getting enough fat, getting enough oil. That was my main struggle in the first year as well, but this was definitely a struggle. It was day, I think, 27, it might have been 17, that I finally made oil from the bitternut hickory or the yellow bud hickory. And I had harvested my salt and I had my different wild herbs. And I remember I was filming a video while eating that meal, and it was so hard not at every single bite to just exclaim how delicious it was after that time without oil. Oh, oil is so important for me for a truly whole meal. So that was 2022. And so now, 3 years later, I am immersing in this year of foraging all of my food and medicine. So what does that look like? This is my pantry right here. So this is what it looks like. I started, just a small background. I am now living in my homeland of northern Wisconsin. I'm exploring the possibility of putting down roots there long term, after 19 years of living in different places. And so my diet is based around my homeland where I grew up, which is the shores of Lake Superior and it's a very cold climate up there. It's zone 4, 4A, 4B, and then a little bit further is 5, depending on where you are. So a lot of the plants that I eat up there are plants that won't be growing all the way down here in southeastern Ohio. But I'm also traveling as I'm doing this as well. So to give you an idea of what's making up my diet, well, I'll start down here in the bottom actually. I drink a lot of herbal teas. Herbal teas make up a substantial portion of my medicine. So here we have fireweed. How many of you have had fireweed before? A couple of us. This is a new one for me this year. This is a plant that is one of the first to come up often after fires. So it grows in areas where you have forest fires. And you actually ferment this, and it tastes very similar to black tea. So it's a unique one. I'll pass this around so you can smell the nice fermented. And that, to me, really does have a smell of a black tea. Here we have mint. This is from a place called Beaver Hollow. This is a wild mint, and I'll pass this around as well. We'll pass around a whole bunch of things to smell. So that I harvested this summer. So I started preparation for this year on July 1st, and I gave myself 3 months to prepare before starting the year. I started the year on October 9th, and today's October 26th?
Yes. Sure.
So I'm about 2.5 weeks in. This is one of my favorite teas, and this is sweet fern. How many of you have had sweet fern? Does sweet fern grow down here? Does anybody know?
It's not as abundant.
Not as abundant, but it does grow. Nice. This is a plant that I'm not 100% sure about, so I'm just going to ignore this one for now. Here we have evening primrose seeds. So these are high in omegas, and they smell and taste like hemp. So they have a similar situation to hemp going on. Over here I have seaweed. So I harvested seaweed from when I arrived in Portland, Maine on this trip. So I harvested a year's supply of seaweed. This here is rockweed and bladderwrack. So they're very high in nutrition, and this is going to be a wonderful source for me. So those are some of my herbs. We're also some spices. So moving up here, we're into the fruit realm. So fruit makes up a large portion of my diet. This is plum sauce, the American plum. And that grows by the thickets where I am. I've never really been able to harvest gallons and gallons of plum, but enough to be able to make some sauce. Here we have blueberries. These are canned blueberries. So what we're talking about here, these are all water bath canned. So foods that are high in acid can be water bath canned. This only needs about 15 minutes and just boiling water. Water bath canning is very simple, very easy, and works for all of the acidic foods. We have here, this is chokecherry leather. So chokecherry is a very important staple for Lakota people, but many indigenous cultures have made chokecherry leather. The pits of chokecherry are high in cyanide, but when you smash up the pits with the fruit and dry it out, that denatures, basically off-gases the cyanide, and then you're able to eat the seed and the fruit. You're getting the nourishing oils and protein of the seed and the getting to eat the fruit at the same time. Here we have elderberry. This is one of my most important medicines. We see there's a lot of that growing here at United Plant Savers. And this has been a long time important medicine for me. Now here we have autumn olive. How many of you are familiar with autumn olive or autumnberry? You have this growing around here, right?
Birds stripped every one of them around my place.
Yeah. That might have been me, actually. So autumnberry or autumn olive. Now this is a plant that people would use the term invasive. And what I would like to say instead of invasive is, a plant that has been introduced from another ecosystem now grows in this ecosystem in a way that it is displacing the native population and doing a disservice, doing harm to the local ecosystem. When we just sort of use the term invasive, we tend to be making an other, saying that this plant is bad. But there is no such thing as a bad plant. So I like to instead of saying invasive, have that bigger picture context. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that actually shortly. Here is my sea salt. So this I harvested in Maine as well. So when I'm harvesting sea salt, I harvest from the cleanest waters that I can find. And we'll talk a little bit about, the issues of pollutants in our environment and that concern. Hazelnuts. And because I love these hazelnuts so much, and they're just so fun, I'm going to pass these around so you can get to see these. These are the American hazelnut. There's the American hazelnut and the beaked hazelnut. So those are the American hazelnuts. So far we've seen herbs, we've seen spices, we've seen fruits, and now we were talking a little bit about nuts. We have here pecans, ginkgo seeds or ginkgo nuts, acorns, black walnuts, chestnuts, and hickory nuts. So nuts are becoming a staple portion of my diet. They are not nearly as prominent as some of the other foods because they take a bit more skill and effectiveness and efficiency with time, and I'm just really starting to develop those skills. Here's green powder. So green powder is, I harvest just many different edible leaves. So basswood and mulberry leaves. Those are two trees that you can harvest and enjoy the leaves. Dandelion and plantago, for example. So I harvest the leaves, I dehydrate them, stinging nettle of course as well, and then I turn it into a powder. So many of us go to the grocery store and we buy the green powder or we order it online. You can make your own green powder in a very, very easy, abundant way, save a lot of money, and this stuff is just as nourishing as what you can buy as supplements. Often more nourishing because that stuff has been shipped around and, sometimes it's sitting for quite a period of time. I have a friend in Asheville he harvests 30 different plants for his green powder and makes just the ultimate super vitamin. And so with this, wherever I'm traveling, if I don't have access to fresh greens, I can take a spoonful of this and add it to my meal and then have my greens. So here's my spice mix. My most challenging part of all of this is the flavor. That is the part that I don't have the skills yet because I was so heavily reliant on the garden herbs like rosemary, thyme, oregano, etc., that I'm only starting to really rewild my palate, break free from the domesticated palate. And one of the things that I'm so interested in is, where I'm from is the land of the Anishinaabe people. I would have loved to have tasted their meal, what that flavor would be. I mean, talk about probably one of the most unique flavors I ever would have experienced would be what all the different herbs that they would harvest. And so that's something that I'm tapping into is rewilding my palate. So, this one is definitely one that I'll pass around. So this is just Monarda and fermented onion. So the Monarda is from my homeland and the onion is from Madison, Wisconsin area. And if we end up with a lot more jars, you can just set them right there too. So this is my herbal tea for the morning. This is my herbal tea for the evening. This is basswood or linden flowers, pineapple weed or wild chamomile, and catnip. And I recently realized that catnip's a little bit too strong for me. Unfortunately, I mixed it all in there, so I tend to be a bit groggy if I take this, I realized. The other two are much more gentle of sleepy time relaxant ones. So here I have mushrooms. Mushrooms make a very staple to my diet. This is a mixture of king bolete and maitake. And then this here is chanterelles. So I harvested 42 pounds of chanterelles this summer. Some I dehydrated and some I froze. And I probably harvested about 100 pounds of maitake. So I'm very abundant in mushrooms. The thing that I'm most abundant in is mushrooms. And I eat mushrooms every day at almost every single meal. Do you have a question?
Do you ever eat lion's mane?
Okay, if I was a richer man, I would eat a lot more lion's mane. But I've only found lion's mane a few times. But, oh my gosh, you read my mind. This is the jar with lion's mane in it. So actually, technically, it's the bear's tooth. Bear's head tooth. It's like, there's 3 that are in the Herculeum genus. Okay. So this is not technically true lion's mane, but it works. It's in the same realm. So this is my medicinal mushroom tea. This is maitake, reishi, turkey tail. So this is chaga from the birches of my homeland. Turkey tail, which I find on different fallen trees. Actually, I'm not sure which trees I find that on. I'm not interconnected enough yet to know that. Reishi, this is a Ganoderma species that grows in my homeland on the dying, not alder, hemlocks. Thank you. And then, yes, and then the maitake, which I don't have that with me in the large form, and then the lion's mane. So I boil this for about 45 minutes. You want to have your mushroom teas at a high temperature for an extended period of time to make it the most medicinal. Some of the herbalists here could give you much more detail on why that is. I don't need to know, I just do it. And this jar represents a tea that is very important to me that I haven't gotten around to yet, and that's my root tea. So dandelion, burdock, and chicory that I need to harvest, roast, and have as my morning. A lot of people use it as like a coffee substitute. I'm not a coffee drinker, fortunately, so I don't need it. But this is, I can't wait to have this. It is root season, so it's time. I still have time before the ground freezes to be able to harvest. Here's the apple cider vinegar. So where I live, we have such an abundance of wild and feral apples, and so I'll have a little swig of this right now. I didn't get 5% acidity, but it's got a kick. I'd give it about 3%, and I'll pass it around. And if anybody wants to take a little swig, you're absolutely welcome to. But no gulps. I'm not that abundant. No, if you gulped it, whatever. I do have a couple gallons at home. Who knows what this is?
Garlic.
Kind of. Yeah, same family. So this is ramps. But this is lacto-fermented ramps. So this is in the salt water that I harvested, and this is a wonderful, wonderful herb for me. Okay, we made it to the top. I designed this so that sort of the staples that provided the most calories and that were I'm the most dependent upon at the top, which generally I guess you would think of those more at the bottom, but this is the way that I did it. But really, all of this is very important. So here, venison. So we talked about the damage that the overpopulation of deer does on our forests. And so I am very much someone who believes that hunting can be done as an ecosystem service. We have managed to hunt in a way that is harmonious with the lands and animals for tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of years, and we can still do that today. I actually didn't hunt this deer because there's such an abundance of deer that are hit by cars that I haven't needed to hunt a deer yet, but I'm hoping to do that this year. So some people say roadkill deer. I say a deer that was hit by a car because it was a deer while it was walking along, and it's still a deer after it's hit. When we say roadkill deer, we tend to other it, and we tend to create this story of like this, gross thing. But it's a deer that was hit by a car. So this is one of my staple foods. I, unlike most hunters, keep the fat there, so I get a fair bit of fat from my deer. Unfortunately, a lot of the deer eat corn from the farmer's fields, and that's where some of this fat is coming from. So it's impossible to actually fully escape the industrial food system. But that's a bit of a rabbit hole we may or may not dive into tonight. And I may as well mention, now that we've gone into that, this jar that I didn't mention earlier, this is the organs of that deer. So this is the liver, kidney, heart, and lungs, all dehydrated, ground up into a powder. And this is super nourishing. So I'll add about a spoonful of that to most of my soups and stews. And we may as well pass this one around and smell it too. That to me is a strong smell. And you may or may not enjoy it, and I invite you to, see what you think. What do you think?
I like fish food a little bit.
Oh, I can see that. Fish food. Probably has some meat ground up in it.
Yeah.
This empty jar also represents something that I haven't harvested yet, and that's fish. I struck out on whitefish 3 times in a row before this project started, so I haven't had any fish. I'll be back in my homeland in about a week. The salmon are still running, and so I will be hopefully nourishing myself with very fatty fish in about a week's time. Here we have monomen, wild rice, the good berry, the food that grows on water. And tonight everybody gets to eat some of this wild rice. We have a pot of it right here. It's warm. And this is the wild rice harvested in my homeland. So I want to give gratitude to the Anishinaabe people who have been stewarding wild rice for at least 700 years. And this plant of all the plants is the one that has changed me at the core more than any other plant. And the reason why is harvesting wild rice is so deeply healing for me. Because when I'm in relationship with wild rice, I know that I'm in relationship with a food that has had a deep relationship with humanity, unbroken for hundreds and hundreds of years. We have the corn people, and the wheat people, and the acorn people, and the teff or injera people of Ethiopia. We have the quinoa people in Bolivia and Peru. And where I'm from is the wild rice people. There's a reservation near me called Menominee, and that means people of the wild rice. And so when I'm harvesting this rice, I'm connected to that. And there's not too many plants where you get to be a part of that in this fragmented society that we live in. And where I live, some people say, well, aren't white people not supposed to harvest wild rice? It couldn't be further from the truth. There's a coalition of Anishinaabe people and non-native people who are stewards of the rice, who protect the rice, who love the rice. And so a woman named Maria Nevela is the person who processes this rice. Wild rice is built into every fiber of her DNA. She's been eating it since the youngest age, and she's one of our local processors. So she does the parching, and actually, I'll pass this around right now. This is the rice as it comes out of the lake in the husk. That's dehydrated, just dried in the sun for a day to a couple days, depending on the scenario. You're welcome to take a few of those and keep them as a little joyful, loving plant to carry with you. It's then parched in order to heat up the husk, or in order to dry the husk and make it brittle. So it can then be put through a thrasher that will separate that husk from the rice. Traditionally, that would have actually been moccasins on feet dancing the wild rice. And some people still do that, but most of the time it goes through a machine, small-scale machinery that is often homemade, on the reservation. But sometimes the next machine, actually, I'll pass this around, is one that is interchangeable with other agriculture, and that's the machine that then separates the chaff from the rice. And it basically is shaking back and forth, and the rice is able to fall through, and the husks separate out, and then that leaves you with the wild rice. And so here's the wild rice in its finished stage. You can, actually, let me smell that. I want to see. It's got a pretty wild rice smell. Sometimes I put it in other jars that have different smells to them, but that's got a wild ricey smell. So yeah, when I'm harvesting wild rice, I'm a part of this long-term culture that existed for a very long time and helping that culture to thrive. So very grateful to the Anishinaabe people for their hundreds of years relationship with the wild rice. 2 more plants that are here, and this of course is my sauce. So this is pear sauce, feral pear sauce, and I eat a lot of wild apple and wild pear sauce. And I like to eat about a pint of this a day. So a quart jar lasts me about 2 days. So I eat a lot of pear sauce and applesauce. This is one of my absolute staples. And then here is, who knows what this is? Staple food, top 10 wild edibles for me. Yeah, stinging nettle. This one's stinging nettle. There's also wood nettle. And this is a staple for me. I make tea from it. I add it in with my rice and my venison. So right now my primary meal is wild rice, venison, stinging nettle, mushrooms, the herbs, salt, and ramps will often go in there. When life is good, I'll have some fresh aronia or autumn olive that I'll add in on top, and then in each bite there'll be a black aronia mostly. There'll be some fresh berries, which adds its own pop, real nice flavor. And then what I'm missing right now is oil. So here I have bitternut hickories or yellow bud hickories. And according to Sam Thayer, there's enough bitternut hickory or yellow bud hickory. Those are 2 names for the same hickory. There's enough of this growing in what we call the United States right now to put a bottle of hickory oil on every dinner table in this country. And that's without us creating an industry around it. Sam Thayer has a small, I guess you could say industry, a press that he then is able to sell this oil. And there's a couple of people who do that. I have only harvested 7 gallons of the yellow bud hickory so far, and I need to harvest about 32. So if anybody knows of any nearby, very productive bitternut or yellow bud hickory, I have the day off tomorrow, and that would become my top priority. I'm getting late in the season. Yeah?
You need to go out and visit solid ground. I'll get you lessons from them.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. So yes, come talk to me afterwards if you know of any productive trees. I'm looking to harvest about 25 more gallons. So a pretty good amount. And it's out there. I just have a lot on my plate, so it's there's so many things to bring together. So in here we also have pecans and the ginkgo seeds, which these are on the small side. I like them when they're bigger. But I'll pass this around. There's some more points that I'd like to get into now with foraging, but before we do that, I would love to take an opportunity for a short intermission to take 3 deep breaths together and then do about 30 seconds of thinking about how much we love the plants. So as we take these breaths, we can remember that all of these breaths are created by the plants that we are dependent upon, but not just the plants, the bacteria that lives in the ocean and the plankton. And so just think about the interconnectedness of life, and even just being here in this room, even though we are outside, there's so much life in this room. So think about that. We'll take 3 deep breaths together, and then we'll do about a half minute or so of silence. Welcome back. Thanks for taking that time with me. Does wonders for the nervous system. So speaking of nervous system, some people might be quite concerned about foraging, about the safety of foraging. So the world's most famous forager right now, I would say, is Alexis Nicole Nelson. She goes by Black Forager on TikTok and Instagram. And she ends all of her videos with "Happy foraging, don't die." And I think that really speaks to the fact that she has 4.5 million followers on TikTok. And the fact that she shares that probably speaks to that a lot of people are concerned about dying through foraging. So there's one simple rule, the number one rule of foraging in order to not die, and that is only eat a plant, or mushroom, or anything, if you're 100% sure of who this plant is, what this plant is, and that you know that how to eat it. So as long as you follow that basic rule, you are in a safe place. Sam Thayer, who is one of the foragers that I've learned the most from, he has done a very deep level of research and has found there are very few documented cases of someone dying from foraging who was being diligent about what they're doing. Most all people who die from foraging or who are substantially injured are people who are just being careless, putting plants, putting mushrooms into their mouth that they don't take the time to identify. They're like, oh, orange mushroom, must be chanterelle, it's a jack-o'-lantern. And so then they poison themselves. So the number one rule of foraging is simply only eat a plant, a mushroom, etc. if you're 100% sure of not just what the plant, a mushroom is, but how to work with it. So pokeweed, for example. Poke, you have to boil it in order to remove the toxins that do harm. And as long as you boil poke, and a lot of people will do a double boil, then you remove that, and it's a staple food that has been eaten by millions of people in the South for hundreds or probably thousands of years. If you don't do poke right, then you can poison yourself. So that's one of the basic rules of foraging. Foraging is far more safe than most people would believe. It is actually a very safe passion and hobby to have. In my book, Food Freedom, which I'll talk about a little bit at the end, there is, towards the back, a little foraging guide. Let me see if I can happen to flip right to it. Yep. So there's the foraging resources section that starts on page 192 that has how to safely forage. And then if you go to my website, robingreenfield.org/foraging, that's a beginner guide to foraging that also directs you to other foragers where you can learn many of these basic things. Another rule of foraging is that whenever you try a new plant, you only try one new plant per day. Because that way, if you have a reaction, you know which plant you're having a reaction to. That said, one day I ate 12 new species of mushroom in one day, so I don't always follow those rules. But as beginners, it's best to follow those basic guidelines. Of course, we're all adults and one young one here, but we are all, even you, are responsible for our own actions. Only we decide what goes into our own body. And so, on that note, there actually is no plant that can kill you, because we put it into our mouth and we would kill ourselves. So it's an important note to take responsibility that if we die through a plant, it is us who did that, not the plant. a little bit about the sustainability of foraging. So some people are quite concerned about foraging, and so they just stick to the grocery store because they don't want to harm the earth. And that's very understandable and very reasonable. The problem is that most of the time we're doing that because we've been indoctrinated to believe that this food system is not harming the earth and that foraging is detrimental. But as you start to look at our food system, you realize actually the food that we're buying from the global industrial food system and even a lot of smaller farms is doing damage to the ecosystem as well. But there's some simple things that you can do if you're looking to get foraging and you're concerned about that. One, eat the weeds. So dandelion and burdock and plantago as a few examples, or smartweed, lady's finger, lady's thumb. I always forget exactly which nickname it goes by. There are dozens and dozens of plants that are considered weeds that are in such high abundance that you could not over-harvest them. Lamb's quarter is another example of that. If you're in Southern California, nasturtium is not going to be eliminated by foraging. So eating these weeds is a wonderful way to get started, where you can be confident that you're not doing harm to the ecosystem. Now, another way that I mentioned earlier, we have autumn olive here. And so you can become an invasivore. So you've heard of locavore, carnivore, herbivore. Well, an invasivore is a person who focuses on eating plants that are considered invasive. By doing so, you're doing an ecosystem service with every single bite you take. That being said, if you do eat the seeds, you got to chew them up. You can't be pooping them out and spreading those seeds. So you have to be, there is still some critical thinking that's required as an invasivore. Now, for those of you who flushed down your poop down the toilet, that's less of an issue, but I compost my poop. So that could be potentially an issue. But I chew up all of these seeds because they're actually high in, I believe it's omegas, GLAs, I can't remember right now. So I actually chew up the seeds of the autumn olive. And on the note of chewing, I'm going to open this up, pass it around. I'm abundant in this, and I'm not abundant in a serving device, so you can use your fingers, or someone could find a device as you please, but this is just autumn olive, nothing else. And so yes, you can start to eat plants that are considered invasive if you are really looking for a way to make certain you're doing an ecosystem service. A lot of people would say that foraging is inherently destructive, but the reality is that foraging can be inherently beneficial. So one of the books that changed my life and the humans who changed my life is Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer. Her new book, The Serviceberry, although short, is very powerful as well. And she really, if you're really looking to, because once you do get into the native plants, that is where you start to need to have a much deeper knowledge. If you're starting to harvest roots, or barks, or the inner layer of trees, like I think that slippery elm comes from the inner layer, for example. I don't know that because I haven't gone there yet. But this is a book that can change you at your core and help you to tap into what she calls the honorable harvest. So, and living in reciprocity. Some people use reciprocity as a buzzword, but it's a really meaningful word. Many of us truly want to and are working towards living in reciprocity, which means learning to give to the plants as we receive. So when we harvest the ramps, for example, many of us harvest the ramps in the spring. Well, we can go back to that patch in the fall, we can harvest the seeds, and we can start new ramp patches, and then we can enjoy that abundance of ramps. Some people would say you absolutely can't harvest ramps sustainably, but you can. There's forest floors that have acres of ramps where you can harvest selectively, thin it selectively, and actually be beneficial to that ramp patch and help to spread it to other areas. So that would be an area where it's a little bit more challenging. So maybe you don't start with ramps. You start with the dandelions, you start with the plantago, you start with the nettles, you start with these easier ones. These books that I have here are some of the foraging books that I recommend. Sam Thayer's, he's got 3 books, The Forager's Harvest, Nature's Garden, and Incredible Wild Edibles. These 3 books can tell you everything you need to know. You no longer, like this talk, although has some wonderful essence to it, everything you need to know is right here in these 3 books. And then his newest book, this field guide, has 750 different plants and has really upped my game. Now I'm in the Midwest, so I use Lisa Rose's Midwest Medicinal Plants and Midwest Foraging. And those are very helpful books for me. I guess I'm back in the Midwest right now. I was just on the East until this morning, until this afternoon. So I use, for my mushrooms of the upper Midwest, wild berries and fruits of Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Michigan. And then I also work with trees of Wisconsin. So numerous, these 5 books here have more regional options as well. And there are many books, but these are the ones that I use. And really, these 9 books accomplish what they really accomplish things for me. I don't actually rarely ever need anything more than those. So, and then with that, braiding sweetgrass, it's not teaching you how to forage, but it really instills foraging in harmony with the land. And there's a couple other books that I have there that are slightly off topic, and I won't dive into those right now. So, some people say, what if everyone started to forage? Wouldn't the ecosystems be decimated overnight? And you have to also ask the question, if everybody wanted to start foraging, wouldn't it mean that we were critically thinking about our industrial food system? Wouldn't it mean that we were questioning the societal norms and the status quo? The answer is absolutely. People who begin foraging start to look at the world in a different way. Sure, some foragers become just takers. Usually it's when they're making money off of it. You don't usually have people who are foraging just for their, food and medicine that over harvest. It's more of the harvesting of, a lot of the medicines we talk about here at United Plant Savers. But the reality is that the more that we forage, the more that we start to fall in love. We start to fall in love with the plants, with the animals, with the earth, with our fellow humanity, with the ecosystems that we're a part of. We start to fall in love with ourselves and have more respect for our very own being. And so if everybody started to forage, I would deeply embrace that, because it would mean that we are having a radical transformation of our relationship with the earth. Foraging is, as Linda Blackout puts it, an act of resistance. It's an act of resistance against systems that result in human beings no longer thinking, no longer having critical thought. It's an act of resistance against dominator cultures that who have intentionally destroyed cultures that have existed in harmony with the land. When settlers came from Europe over to this land, one of their strategies for destroying the cultures was to destroy their food and destroy their connection with food. In the plains and all the way to the East Coast, that's the buffalo. You destroy the buffalo, you destroy the culture, you destroy the relationship. And as much as we aren't taught this, that's been done to cultures around the world, and not just indigenous cultures, but it's being done to us every day. Every one of us here, no matter what culture we're from, we're taught to fear the earth. We're taught that we're separate from the earth. We're taught that we don't belong here on earth. We're taught that we don't belong in the forests and in the fields and in the waters. And so for me, this year of foraging all my food and medicine is a deep practice of belonging. It's a practice of saying, I am a human being, a human animal, and I am a part of this home. It's about finding a home here, a deep home. And my belief is that our greatest threat as a humanity is the belief that we're separate. when you look at most of our exploitation and oppression and extraction, we do it because we believe that either we're separate or we're superior. And that comes to racism and sexism and the destruction of our ecosystems. And so I think one of the most powerful things we can do is dissolve the illusion of separateness and embrace that we are interconnected with it all, which is why I carry Thich Nhat Hanh. He uses the terms interconnected and interbeing a lot. He's one of the deep, deep teachers in my life. He's not a forager, definitely not a forager, but his practices, he teaches us how to walk as if each step is a greeting to Mother Earth. Or actually, what he says is, walk as if you're kissing the earth with each step. Walk as if each step is a kiss to Mother Earth. And if we do that as we're foraging, wow, we'll take things up to the next level. So let's see, what else did I want to mention here? Yeah, so reconnection is the remedy to our separateness. That's something that I deeply, deeply feel. And a note about that, take this to the next level where I've been going, and this is a really interesting practice, but we now know that this body, all bodies here, are more bacterial cells than we are actual human cells. So each of our bodies has like around 3 pounds, I believe, of bacterial cells. And our bodies are more bacteria than they are human cells. If you really start to wrap your head around it, you start to think, okay, then what are we? When you start to realize that there's one different, unique species of mite that lives here that doesn't colonize your chin and has a relationship to this portion of your body, you realize that you are an interconnected culture in your very essence and being. And that if all of that were to die overnight, we die. So what are we? What is a human being? A human being is an interconnected culture in and of itself. And so when you go to that level, you start to be able to break down this illusion of separateness even more. Another way that I like to look at that is when we take the water from a creek or even from the tap, and we put that into the hands. That water, at that point, it's clear to say, is not us for most of us. We put that water in our mouth. We swish it around. Okay, not us yet. We swallow it. It's in our stomach. Is it us? Now it's in our veins. Is it us? I sure would say so. We pee it out onto the land. Is it us? Most people would say no. But when you really look at it, you start to see that we're interconnected with it all. So the last few notes that I would like to leave us on before opening it up to questions are, 1, living simply so that others may simply live. That is something that I've taken away from Mahatma Gandhi and taken deep inside, and foraging is a way to do that. Foraging is a deep practice of living simply and closely connected to earth. I'd like to mention the concept of earth code. So there are laws that are set up to prevent us from foraging. And when in those scenarios, what I do is I follow earth code. Rather than blindly following any government code, most of which are designed to keep us separate, I will first follow earth code, which is this action harmful to the earth, to the plants, to the animals, to humans? And if the answer is no, then I am going to follow through with that action. Better yet, is this action beneficial to the earth, to my community, and to myself? So earth code is about critical thinking. Another note that I want to make, I want to mention Lila June Johnston finished her PhD recently, and she has a really in-depth thesis on the long-term indigenous relationship with being stewards of this land that really is a beautiful exploration. Right now I'm foraging all my food, but as you start to pay more attention, you have to ask, well, what is foraging actually? Like, this wild rice is wild, but when the Anishinaabe people have been stewarding it for hundreds of years, it's also like a human garden at the same time. And so I think that's a really beautiful thing to explore more of. Land Back is a really powerful movement. If you want to learn about that, you can go to landback.org, and that's about putting land back into the hands of the original stewards of the land. I think the statistic is like 80% or so of all biodiversity is in the hands of indigenous people. And so when we put more land back into the hands of indigenous people, it accomplishes the goal of creating an earth that's actually habitable. One last note is, as I'm doing this year of foraging all my food, I'm launching something that Chip was talking a lot about, and that's planting trees. So we've recently launched the 1 Million Community Fruit Trees Initiative, where we're going to plant through a very grassroots collaborative effort 1 million fruit and nut trees over the next decade. So if you're excited about that and being involved, we're looking for people to start little micro nurseries to grow the trees. I can see you're into that idea possibly. So people that are harvesting seeds and cuttings, growing them, and then we'll be doing both people being able to pick them up at these local hubs as well as shipping them. And so by doing this, we reduce the cost of buying trees and are able to produce that abundance ourselves. And then having thousands of people all across the United States planting these trees for ecosystem stewarding, for food for the humans, and food for the plants and animals. We're focused primarily on native fruits and nuts. So you can go to robingreenfield.org/community fruit trees if you want to learn about that. For resources, if you go to robingreenfield.org/foraging, that'll plug you into all the foraging resources that you might be seeking. If you go to findaforager.com, that's a database of over 500 foragers. So one of the most powerful ways to really get out foraging is to go with others who know what they're doing. So that's a database you can use to find foragers to learn from. And then the last thing that I'll say is I'm really excited to, well, actually, I just want to make a note of this moment of realization. I have plants to my right, plants to my left, plants right here. It is nice to be surrounded by plants right now. So this book, Food Freedom, is about my year of growing and foraging all my food. If you open the first page, it says this book is not for sale. So this book is available on a donation basis, and that donation could be that you grow some extra kale and share it with your elderly neighbor who doesn't have access to nourishing food, or you learn some plants and you teach others. So I would love to share this book with anybody that would like to take this home. I'm happy to sign them as well. I'll be hanging out for long enough to sign any books that people would like. I also encourage you to bring some back with you to put into your local library, school libraries, university libraries, community libraries like this, at public libraries, and also to share them as gifts with others who you think that this will be a transformational tool. So it's 3 parts. It's the story of my year of growing and foraging all my food. It's a critique of the global industrial food system, and it's an empowerment manual for liberating ourselves and our communities through food. If you do have financial means to make a donation, 100% of our profits go to giving this book to others who don't have funds, as well as Black and Indigenous-led food sovereignty initiatives. So the resources that this book generates helps to proliferate exactly what this book is about. So I'm grateful for you all sticking with me. That was, well, actually not too long. That was only about an hour and 10 minutes or so, but I know I packed a lot in. So I'm really grateful for you being here and sharing all that.